Hi everyone, let's talk about future time clauses in this video. What I mean by that is to be able to write or say something like, when I'm done with my homework, I'll call you, or by the time this is over, we'll know a lot more. It's that, okay? So that's what a future time clause is, and I'm going to show you how to do it. It's going to make your writing much more academic and controlled, and it'll help you speak more clearly and be more specific in what you're trying to say. You're probably already using future time clauses. You might be making a mistake because there's one specific mistake that many students do when they're learning this, and I'll show you how to avoid that. So first, let's actually start by reviewing what a clause is. A clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb. It has to have a subject and a verb in order to be a clause. And usually that means that it's a sentence too. But sometimes it's not complete. So for example, if I say, I want to run a race. I want to run a race. I have the subject here. Want is the verb. I want to run a race. It's a group of words with a subject and a verb. This one actually is complete because it makes sense. It has the complete idea. So this type of clause, there's lots of types, but this type of clause we can say is an independent clause, okay? But you can make it dependent or not complete by adding words like whenever or other time words like while, when, before, after. Okay, so whenever I want to run a race. What? It's not done. It still has a subject, it still has verb, but because we have this word here now, this time word, this clause is not complete. It doesn't make sense by itself. It needs to have something else, another clause, to make it complete. So for example, whenever I want to run a race, I get excited. Okay? Thinking about running a race. Okay. Whenever I want to run a race, comma, I get excited. This is a complete sentence. This is an independent clause. It has a subject, verb, complete thought. This is a dependent clause because it's not complete. Okay? So there are dependent clauses and there are independent clauses. Two types. Today we're talking about future time clauses. So they're sentences with a future time clause and an independent clause or a main clause. So I'm going to say today that in our lesson that you will have two clauses in your sentences. You will have a dependent clause, which will be the time clause, okay? And then you'll have an independent clause, which I'm going to call the main clause, okay? And that is what we're going to talk about right now. For example, when the semester ends, I will run a race. Okay, I have two clauses here. Can you see them? There's two clauses. Remember, a clause has a subject and a verb inside of a group of words. So let's look at this one. When the semester ends, that's the group of words. It's a chunk. When the semester ends. Okay, it has a subject, the semester, and it has a verb, ends. I will run. I will run a race. That is another clause. I have a subject and a verb in there. So I have two clauses. Which one is independent or complete and which one is not? Well, I can give you a clue. the clause that starts with a time word like when, while, before, after, as soon as, those time words, that is always going to be the dependent clause. This one is the dependent clause. And the one with just the subject and verb and complete thought is the independent clause. Now this sentence, because it is one sentence with two clauses, this one sentence is actually called a sentence with a future time clause. What do I mean by that? Well, there's a time clause in there. There's a time clause. Right here is the time clause, when the semester ends. That's a time clause. It uses a time word at the beginning of it. And then over here, I will run a race. I make a sentence about the future. So future, time clause. And these are very common, very common, very important to be able to create. So let me give you some time words that we use often. We use when, we use while, before, after, as soon as, until, and by the time. These are, I would say, the most common time words that we use to start time clauses. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to point out. Okay, the second thing I want to point out is that notice the verb tense inside the sentence. There's two verbs. What tense are the verbs in? So over here we have this verb, ends. When the semester ends, what verb tense is that? That is actually simple present. That's the simple present. Over here, will run. Will run, that is future, okay? Future time, okay? So very important. That's a rule. When you're writing a sentence with a future time clause, you have to follow this rule. The clause with the time clause, the time clause needs to have a verb in the simple present. Okay? When the semester ends, simple present. That's the time clause. It needs simple present. The main clause, or the independent clause, whatever you want to call it, must have a verb in the future, okay? And that can be will, or it could be going to, okay? Whichever one you want to use, it doesn't really make a difference. So, when the semester ends, simple present, I will run, or I am going to run a race. Darn it. Okay, now let me give you another example. So let's take a look at these examples. When I register for the race, I will pay online. After I pay, I will train hard. As soon as the race starts, I will start my watch. All of these sentences have future time clauses in them. Let's review our rule, how the time clause needs to have the simple present and the main clause needs to use future. Let's see. When I register, simple present, for the race, I will pay online, future. This is the main clause, okay? And this is the time clause. How do we know that again? Because the time clause starts with the time word. After I pay, simple present, for the time clause, I will train hard, future, for the main clause. As soon as the race starts, simple present, for the time clause, I will start my watch, future, for the main clause. Now remember, you can also use be going to for all of these if you want. Let me say something else while we're here. For all of these sentences, you see there's two clauses. It doesn't matter which one goes first. You can order them however you want. But if your sentence starts with a time word, the time clause, you must have a comma before the next clause. So you see, when I register for the race, comma. After I pay, comma. As soon as the race starts, comma. If you start your sentence with the main clause, then you don't need a comma. So for example, after I pay, here, let's rewrite this one. After I pay, I will train hard. You could also say, I will train hard after I pay. You see, now I put the time clause at the end after the main clause. So here, because the time clause is at the end of the sentence, I don't need a comma. Fun fact, right? Fun comma fact for you. Actually, this is a really important comma rule. So if you have trouble with commas, this is a good one to know. Sometimes when we're making our sentences with future time clauses, we might get confused about which thing is first and which thing is second. So it helps to know that if you use these time words, the subject and verb after it is what introduces the first event. And I'll explain that with an example. And when we use these time words, before, until, by the time, we're introducing the second event. But you only need one time word in one sentence, even though there's two clauses. So let me give you an example. So here we go. Look at this sentence. After the race ends, I will drink water. I have my two clauses. Here's the time clause, after the race ends. Here's the simple present in the time clause. Here's the main clause with the future. Here's the comma, because I started my sentence with the time clause. And look at the word after, right? I use the word after. So after is a word that introduces the first event. There's two actions. Which one's first? Well, if you look at the word after the race ends. So that's going to be the first thing that happens. This is first. I'll drink water. That is the second thing that will happen. After the race ends, I'll drink water. And it's the same thing if you change the order. I'll drink water after the race ends. It's still ends is the first thing. Drink water is the second thing. Now, when we use the word, so that's the same with all of these. When we use words like before, until, and by the time, we're introducing the second event. So look at this one. Before I go home, I'll stretch a lot. So here's my time clause. I'm using simple present over here. Here's the main clause. Using future over here. We got the comma because it's a time word at the beginning. But look at the word before. That introduces the second event. Before I go home. So this is the second action. Go. I'll stretch a lot. That's the first one. So first I'm going to stretch and then I'll go home. Over here, first the race is going to end and then I'll drink water. So that might help you to understand the order of things when you're using time words like these. I want to point out the word not, the not until and until. These ones are a little bit tricky. Okay, so let's look at this example with not until. Not ... until. The reason why I put those dots there is because there's things that go between both of those words, okay? But they actually come together, kind of. So they won't announce the winners until the race ends. Do you see the word until? Do you see the not right here? It's attached to a verb. So we have not and we have until. And there's a lot of things between them. But this comes together. It always comes together. They won't announce the winners until the race ends. So in other words, this thing will not happen until this thing happens, right? So this thing has to happen first, okay? And then this thing will happen. It's very common to use not until. Let's look at until. Here, I have just until in this sentence. You should watch this video until you understand. So I'm only using until, there's no not. So when we just have until, this is the time clause, this verb is the second action. And over here, this is the first action. So you should watch this video first until you understand. Then you can stop. And I'll finish like that. So I hope that this video has helped you and that you can get on with making some really great sentences with future time clauses. And don't forget, just don't forget, the biggest mistake that I see with future time clauses is that students forget to use the simple present in the time clause and they use the future. And they say, when I will study, I will be better. When I study, I'll be better. So don't put the future in the time clause. Simple present in the time clause. Future in the main clause. Bye.